Joining me now is Gerald Bourquet. He is the lead NBA editor and Suns reporter for Fansided. Gerald, thanks for being with me. I think everybody was really kind of blown away by what we saw in this last game of the NBA Finals. The Bucks have come storming back in all of this. I want to start with how Phoenix responds to being under this kind of pressure. I mean, in your experience covering the team, what do you know about their resiliency and ability to potentially bounce back?
Yeah, I mean, those are two buzzwords for this team in terms of their ability to bounce back from losses. They've only had, I think, 6 losing streaks all season long, and only one of them until recently was a 3-game losing streak. And the last time they lost 3 straight, they dropped to 8-8 on the season, and that totally changed their season from there. I think they finished 43-13 after that, which was the best record in the NBA from that point onward. So this is a group that hates losing. Monty Williams calls his team sore losers all the time because they stew on these losses. But this feels a little bit different, honestly, because of the stage that we're on, because of the way that the Bucks have won, especially these last 2 games, back-to-back kind of heartbreaking losses. So I'm probably as curious as anyone to see how they bounce back on this stage now that it's going back to Milwaukee, where it's going to be very loud and facing elimination for the first time.
There are obviously challenges associated with defending Milwaukee's big 3, but first off, tactically, offensively, what do you think Phoenix needs to be thinking about in order to have a chance to get back in this?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of conversation lately about Devin Booker and whether he played too much hero ball in Game 5. I don't really ascribe to that personally, but I do think the ball needs to move a lot more than it did in Game 5. We saw at the end of that game in the fourth quarter when they were able to claw their way back, they did it by moving the ball. Chris Paul came to life in that fourth quarter, and that's when the Suns are at their best, is when they are kind of firing on all cylinders like that and sharing the ball. So heading into Game 6, the last couple of games, their potential assists, their passes, all of those numbers have been down. So they need to find a way to get the ball moving. Their offense has been pretty great in this series overall. I think their offensive rating would have led the league during the regular season. They do need to find a way to stop the Bucks' big 3 on the other end, though.
Is it a shame in that regard that a performance like the one that Devin Booker had, the performances that he's been having, are not kind of top billing when you've got a situation where these guys can just turn on a dime? I mean, to be up by 16 and then the second quarter I think I looked up at my television at one point and I was like, what just happened? That's got to be kind of tough when you've got a guy who is really kind of playing transcendent basketball in an NBA Finals, and it just doesn't matter at the end of the day when you don't get the win.
Yeah, I mean, I think that second quarter of Game 5 really shocked everyone. I know that there was a weird energy in the building by halftime just to see how they were rolling early on. They were up 16. It looked like it was going to be a blowout early on, and then you look up a couple minutes later and suddenly it's a game again. I think the team panicked a little bit. I think the fans panicked a little bit. And I think that's why Devin Booker came out so aggressive in the third quarter, was because of, they were moving the ball in the second quarter. They just weren't hitting shots. And I think they got away from that because it wasn't working. And of course, that run that the Bucks made came in the 5 or 6 minutes that Devin Booker was on the bench. He was a plus 12 in the game, and the Suns were a minus 16 in the 6 minutes that he sat. So that was kind of a shocking turn of events. And Suns fans, unfortunately, are used to this. They're used to seeing Devin Booker going off and the team not getting a win because the rest of his teammates kind of disappeared. So it was unfortunate to see this happen again on a final stage, but hopefully they get back to what has gotten them there in terms of sharing the ball. And we'll see Devin Booker put in a great performance in a win this time instead of in back-to-back losses.
If they do start to become stagnant offensively, who is responsible for being the catalyst for stopping down and changing it immediately? Because I think one of the things we noticed in Game 5 is that you're not going to have a lot of time to make adjustments or to be selfish or not sharing the ball or whatever it is. I mean, the Bucks will make you pay for it. So when they do become stagnant offensively, who are you looking at to kind of right the ship?
I think it'd be Monty and Chris. I mean, obviously they're the leaders of the team in terms of experience and just leadership positions, but also, the Suns lost that game in the non-Booker minutes when Chris Paul was out there running the offense, and he didn't look aggressive or as aggressive in looking for his shot. And credit Drew Holiday, because he's done a tremendous job on Chris Paul in this series, and that's part of it. But Paul hasn't looked like himself the last few games. We're not sure if he's 100% healthy. He says he's fine, but he just hasn't been as aggressive in looking for his shot. And then Monty needs to be a little bit more liberal with using his timeouts and getting the team back and centered when they do have those stretches where it looks like they're not really running their offense or they're out of sorts, because as we saw in game 5, it only takes a couple minutes to drastically alter the course of a game or even the series. So they really have to be locked into their game plan today. And if they're not, it's on Chris and Monty Williams to center this team kind of like they have all season long.
Do you and those who are covering the team closely believe that Chris Paul is, in fact, healthy physically?
I am kind of torn on this. I feel like he's played with a lot of heart, and that's kind of what we saw in game 1. I think he had 32 in game 1. He had a phenomenal game, and he still played efficiently in the series, but his handle looks a little bit looser than we're used to seeing from him. Some of his passes have been a little bit off target and not with that kind of pinpoint accuracy we've come to expect from him. So I think the ligaments in his wrist, because he mentioned this after the conference finals, that he had to get an MRI done on his wrist, and there were some partially torn ligaments in there. I don't think those are fully healed. I think he's still well enough to play well, obviously, because we saw it in the first 2 games, but I don't know if he's 100% healthy. He's going to deny it until, the summer when he has time to heal. But I don't know if he's fully healthy. I think he's good and he's healthy enough to make an impact. He just has to find a way to get over this Drew Holiday hump, because I think that's been the biggest thing holding him down the last few games.
It's such a tall task. I mean, I think Milwaukee knew exactly what they were doing when they brought Drew Holiday in. What he offers defensively, the play that he made at the end of game 5, I mean, it's just stunning. But what he does night in and night out, I think everybody can see what a challenge that is. But if Chris Paul is healthy physically, and can contribute and figure out Drew Holiday as much as he can, would the only other explanation be that potentially he might be feeling the pressure of what has been described as, a series built completely around him and capping his career the way, that he has the potential to do? I mean, is there any sort of mental breakdown that you think is associated with some of the mistakes or poor performance that we saw?
I think that could be part of it, but I do think that the, not that this is what you were saying, but I do think the Chris Paul choker narrative in the playoffs is a little overblown, especially when you look at what he's done just over the course of this postseason run to help the Suns get to this point. It wasn't long ago that he was dropping, 41 in a conference finals closeout game. So I don't think the moment is too big for him. I think the pressure has definitely mounted. And I think if you're not playing 100% and you're having to contend with Drew Holiday, all of those things can combine into some of the late game turnovers that we've seen or some of the lack of aggression. But honestly, the Suns need to do him a favor and take some of the pressure off him, because at this point, even just getting the ball across half court is a struggle because Drew Holiday is just hounding him 3/4 of the way up the court. So they need to let somebody else bring the ball up the court, use him in a little bit different of a way than they have in the past, and kind of take some of that Drew Holiday pressure off of him, because he's done a really good job of just hounding him everywhere and not giving him the space that he normally has on those mid-range jumpers that he loves. So I think, based on what we've seen early in the series too, I don't think the moment's too big for Chris Paul. I think the moment's getting bigger, and I do think the Suns need a really big performance out of him in game 6 tonight if they want to win.
What should Monty be thinking about? Who should he be looking towards to take some of the pressure off of him, bring the ball up the floor, do all the things that would alleviate some of that pressure?
Yeah, I think Devin Booker and Cam Payne are the obvious choices, especially in the non-Booker minutes. Cam Payne likes to get downhill, and he's quick enough to get by whoever they have on him in the half court if they're pressuring him full court. That would be a great way to alleviate some of that pressure. I also think kicking it up ahead to the wings like Mikal Bridges, getting him a little bit more involved, because since game 2, and other than the fourth quarter of game 5, he's been kind of a non-factor on the offensive end. So finding a way to get him involved, even if it's just letting him bring the ball up the court and touching the ball in that way, might be a good way to spur his confidence on, get him more comfortable with the ball in his hands, and again, take some of that pressure off Chris Paul to bring the ball up the court and back his way down to the half court line every time.
Do you think that the issues that they need to fix heading into this game are more on the offensive side in terms of adjustments, or defensively?
Yeah, I mean, I think the offense is the one that sticks out as far as just moving the ball and getting back to what got them there. But the offense has still been performing at a high level, whichever way they've been playing. I think defensively, they need to find a solution, because, you know, Giannis is going to get his. He's just a force of nature. He's incredible. He's hard to stop. And the Suns really only have one guy in DeAndre Ayton that can hope to limit him a little bit. Chris Middleton's been a killer in this series, but when they have those two going off and Jrue Holiday playing like he did in game 5, it's a tall task to beat a team like that. So they've got to find a way to clamp down on Jrue, because he's been really taking it to Chris Paul in their one-on-one matchup. He's been too strong for Devin Booker. They need to find a way to kind of limit what he's doing, because if they have all three of those guys going off, the Suns are in for a really tough challenge to compete with that offensively on the other end.
As you reflect on the first 2 games, I mean, obviously, Chris Middleton's contributions cannot be overstated. And the last couple of games, you know, he had kind of like the Chris Middleton game that we were all waiting for, but his contributions in this last game too were incredible. Like you said, when you have all 3 of them playing well, I'm not sure how you beat this team, but is there anything that you look at in the first 2 games with Phoenix and go, well, aside from, you know, being stagnant offensively and sharing the ball, unless it really is as simple as that, is there anything else that you're looking at in the first 2 games and going, they need to just get back to doing X, whether it's offensively or defensively?
Yeah, I mean, the sharing the ball is obviously the big one, but part of that sharing the ball is attempting a lot of 3-pointers. You know, in game 2, the big story of that game was they hit 20 of their 40 3-point attempts. And in this last game, in game 5, they only attempted 19. So they attempted more than they made in game 2. And part of that is what the Bucks are doing defensively. They're doing a good job of, you know, trying to take some of those options away. They're not doubling Devin Booker. So the ball, he was going to work one-on-one, and it was working for a little bit in that third quarter. But then the offense got too stagnant. So they need to make sure that the ball is moving. They need to make sure that they're just getting up 3-pointers, because their 3-point attempts have been trending downward. And that's a huge thing, because if you are not out shooting the Milwaukee Bucks from 3, you're going to have a hard time, because they take and make a lot of 3-point attempts. And that's one thing that, you know, really hurt them in game 5. I think the Bucks shot 14 of 28 from 3. So they're getting up attempts. The Suns shot a better percentage. They just didn't shoot enough of them in that game. So they really need to get back to that. And they need to find a way to make Chris Middleton's life a little bit more difficult. They were just hitting some really tough shots in game 5. There's not a lot you can do about that, but the Suns defense needs to do a better job of throwing them off their rhythm early, so they're not able to hit some of those shots so comfortably down the stretch.
If this series gets away from them, and we all look back at this last game as the like, oh no sort of moment, like, this is about to get a lot more difficult. Is this going to be the game 5, that's going to essentially haunt Chris Paul and the Suns fan base for the duration, as long as people are thinking about this series?
Yeah, I think there are multiple moments in the last couple of games that are the stuff that therapy appointments are made of out here in the Valley. Like that block that Giannis had at the end of game 4 was just incredible. And there's not a lot you can do about that. You know, you can say maybe Devin Booker threw the pass a little too high, but 9 times out of 10, that's an alley-oop. I think he's maybe the only guy in the league that could have gotten to that alley-oop and made that block that he did. And then in game 5, you'll look at that 6-minute stretch where Devin Booker was on the bench and the Suns just completely fell apart. You'll remember the Jrue Holiday steal and the Giannis alley-oop on a pretty dangerous foul from Chris Paul, honestly. there's a lot of moments that you can just look at, but those stretches, and especially in the fourth quarter of game 4, they had a 7-point lead in the fourth quarter and they just couldn't keep it. And a lot of times during the regular season, we saw them protect those leads. I think in game 5 too, that was the first time in these playoffs that they've had a double-digit lead and not won the game. So there are a lot of just little things like that that are going to stick out from this run if they're not able to pull it off, if they lose 4 straight for the first time all season at the worst time of the season. A lot of little things like that that you're going to remember from this playoff run. I think it will hurt Chris Paul, but I don't think it'll tarnish his playoff legacy any, if it makes sense. I think just by getting a team to the finals, he's made his case many times in the past already as one of the greatest players of all time, but taking this Suns franchise to the finals in a season where no one expected this from them, I think that speaks more than, losing 4 straight and falling short.
Yeah, I think he'd obviously love to punctuate that with a ring, but if you're paying attention, the fact that he's been snake bitten so many times in the playoffs, I think stands out more in his resiliency than some kind of, breakdown pressure-wise clutch narrative that's being pushed. But it's not over yet. So I guess before I let you go, do you expect Chris Paul and Phoenix to respond tonight?
I've waffled on this. I think the extra days in between games has given me a lot of time to rethink things. I think after game 5, I felt like it was over. I felt like the Bucks were going to close in 6. And now that I've had more time to think about it, like, this team is really good at bouncing back. They haven't lost 4 games straight all season. And we're kind of due a good Chris Paul performance. I think we saw an inkling of it at the end of game 5. I really do think the Suns have a good chance of shocking the world and forcing a game 7. It could be a Bucks blowout, but it could be just another ugly game where the Suns win ugly like they've done so many times in this postseason. So selfishly, I would love to cover a game 7. So I'm hoping that we see the Suns win in game 6 tonight. But I'm torn on this. I'm going to say Suns win and force a game 7.
It'd be fun for the rest of us, too. Not that we would be covering it, but this series has just turned into something that's been so enjoyable for somebody that doesn't have a dog in the fight. Gerald Bourquet, thank you so much for spending a couple minutes with us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.